Let's all gather around and take a seat. Brother, scholar, Minister Mark Shipp will be presenting the Bible study lesson this morning as well as a sermon. So let's make our ways to our seats and get ready to begin. And of course, Mark Shipp needs no introduction or trumpeted fanfare.
Get my life together here. Okie doke. Well, just telling my wife, I think the 9:30 hour here is like the old Pirates of the Caribbean movie, more or less like the pirate code, more or less guidelines. We call it Brentwood time at Brentwood Oaks. In other words, when people are ready. So open up your Bibles to the book of Ruth. My memory is that last time I was here, I did Jonah. I think that's right. And so since my wife and I have been doing extensive traveling around the country, excuse me, for the past several months, and we just got back from the West Coast, so I had to do something that's a little more on the tip of my brain. We'll be looking at Ruth today, and I'll be doing more or less what I did, the same thing I did with Jonah. I'll do my own Mark Shipp translation and my own commentary on the book as we go through. And so I would like for you to have your Bible, whatever translation you're using, so you can raise your hand, or you can take exception to my translation, or you can say, wow, how great, or you can say that's terrible, or, not so much the latter, but comments are coveted. So you can interact with my translation. My translation is going to be very, very literal, just to give you a flavor of what the original Hebrew says. And there'll be some occasions where I'll say, the NIV says this, the NRSV says this, here's what I think it is, because as you know, with translating any language, no one literal translation captures the idioms of another language. That's why translations are always and necessarily interpretations. Every translation is an interpretation, okay? And so without further ado, let's go to the Father in prayer, and then we'll begin with Ruth 1:1. Father in heaven, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Guide our thoughts and our lesson this morning. Give us ears to hear and hearts to act on the things we learn. For it is in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, Ruth 1:1. This is a story. It is one single story with an epilogue at the end. I intend to only do chapters 1 and 2 today. So if I'm really efficient and y'all have no questions whatsoever, then we may have time for chatting in between now and the service. I doubt that'll happen, but I doubt I'll be that efficient. That's why I brought this up here. Yes. Y'all ever heard of these things? Fisherman's Friends that you get? It's a cough drop that you get at HEB. They're fantastic. They taste terrible, but they really work. So I'll try to talk around it. And it happened in the days when the judges judged. So this is written long after the days when the judges judged. When did the judges judge? Well, it depends on how you count. On one scheme, it's 1,400 down to 1,000. In another scheme that I think is more likely the case, 1,200 BC down to around 1,000, the days of the judges. BC, you count backwards. Y'all know that, right? You count backwards. So 1,200 down to 1,000, you go backwards. AD, you count forwards. That's how it works. Okay. So when the judges judged, there was a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem of Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Okay, it tells us a lot right away. Tells us a lot of of the plot of the book, and that is there's a famine. They don't have bread. Now, the word for bread in Hebrew also means food. Okay, there's no food. And so they leave the land of Judah, or the southern tribe of the country of Israel, to go across the border to the country of Moab. Okay, that Israel never really ruled over, or not for long when they did, in order to be able to survive. The other thing to pay attention to is this is a man from Bethlehem, and the word Bethlehem, the name of the town, that's David's town, and we get to the end of the book, we find one of the reasons for writing the book, which is a direct descendant from Ruth and Boaz is King David. Okay, this is his deep background, and he has an ancestress that is Moabite. The other thing to point out about Bethlehem, it means the house of bread. Literally, that's what the word Bethlehem means, the house of bread. Well, bread is the point of the book. They don't have any. They've got to go somewhere in order to get some, okay? And they leave Israel to go to a foreign land to get bread. So pay attention to that. Everything is going to revolve around bread, around eating, around harvesting, especially the barley harvest, which shows up at the end of chapter 1. So they go to the country of Moab. The man and his wife, the man's name is Elimelech, which means my God is king. Now, it's a great name. It's very Hebrew sounding. My God rules, basically. Okay. All fine and good. It's not some sort of silly name. Pay attention to the names in the book. I think all the names are not just names, they're also symbols. They also have symbolic meaning, okay? And I think that's important for you to understand. The name of the man was Elimelech, my God is king, and the name of his wife, Naomi. And the name of his 2 sons was Machlon and Kilion, wasting and ending. Okay? Now, it could be that the parents named the little, rascals, little wasting and little ending. I'm dubious about that. It may be the storyteller didn't have the names of the 2 sons, and they died young. So they're Mr. Wasting and Mr. Ending, okay? Naomi. means my pleasant one. And that becomes important in the book. Pretty soon, in chapter 1, she explains the name and why she shouldn't be called Naomi, my pleasant one, but rather Mrs. Bitter. Okay? So all the names, I think, are symbolic. Some names are a lot easier to translate and understand than other names. So, my God is King, my pleasant one, and Mr. Wasting and Mr. Ending were Ephrathites, that is from the clan of Ephrata, which is a region or a clan of Judah that encompasses the city of Bethlehem, which is not far, maybe 5 or 10 miles from Jerusalem. So they were Ephrathites from the house of bread, Bethlehem, of Judah, and they went to the country of Moab, and they remained there. But Elimelech died. Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took for themselves Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah. Okay, what is Orpah? Not exactly known, but perhaps obstinate or thick hair. So you decide. Miss Obstinate or Miss Thick Hair. Okay? Could be either one. And there's a couple of other possibilities I will not encumber you with. Yes? No. I don't think so. I've actually never heard this question before, so my immediate reaction is to say, no, of course not. But and I'll have to think about it, but I don't believe so. This is a standard idiom. To take for oneself a woman is to marry. Usually, always. It always has to be the paterfamilias, right? The head of the family. They don't, you're right. So it's interesting. I'll have to think about that. But it is, I think, the standard idiom for marrying. Okay? It seems to be the case, yeah. Maybe they had to ask their mother. As Americans, we always try to fill in the blanks of our knowledge. Where there's gaps in our knowledge, we try to fill it in, add color, and that's okay. I don't know the answer. I don't know. I would suggest whatever else may be behind this, they married. And the narrator isn't giving us the backstory because it's not that important to the narrator, okay? To fill in all the blanks we're curious about. But all those are good questions, and it may well be right that they're on their own to do whatever, so they marry these foreign wives. But notice the marriage to foreign wives is not condemned here at all. Though no Moabite or Ammonite are allowed in the assembly of Israel for 10 generations, says, I believe it's Deuteronomy, shall not allow a Moabite or an Ammonite. Okay? It doesn't say if they become followers of Yahweh, which she does. Okay? So there's a lot of gaps in our knowledge, and this book is full of holes that sort of invite us. And the analogy I use is like rocks in the road. When you see a rock in the road, don't stumble on it, bend down, pick it up, and look under it, because you don't know. So all that's good questions, and we simply don't know the answers. Why is she allowed in the assembly of Israel. This is when the judges judge, so it's long after Sinai. By everybody's reckoning, it's long, hundreds of years later, apparently, or at least some 100 or 200 years later. Okay, so for what we don't know, we do know the man died and the kids married Moabite wives, and that's not condemned here in the text. You can make of that what you will. Okay, so Orpah, obstinate or thick adorning hair, lady. And the second's name was Ruth, which means probably female companion, female friend, which that's what she is in the book. She's female friend to Naomi. So that one's a lot easier. It could also mean a refreshing drink of water. So she's a refreshing drink, which she's kind of that also in the book. So make of that what you will, but I think the names are all symbolic. Are these made-up names? Are they real names? Don't know. Doesn't matter, right? Probably they're real names, but the Jews were always very good at naming things with double meanings. Very, very good. Just read the book of Genesis and you'll see lots of that, okay? Symbolic names. In fact, all names are symbolic in the Pentateuch, pretty much all names, okay? This is not the Pentateuch, but I think paying some careful attention to the names helps us understand the point of the book, okay? So, name of the second was Ruth, and they remained there around 10 years. So, good length of time. And also then, the two of them, Mahlon and Chilion, Mr. Wasting and Mr. Ending, died, and the woman was bereft of her two sons and her husband. She arose, and her daughters-in-law arose to return from the country of Moab, because she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people to give bread to them. Now, I've already mentioned that bread is highly symbolic in the book. It's life-sustaining and it's blessing. And they have not had bread for some time, at least 10 years, longer than 10 years. And we don't know how the people of Judah survived during that period. The Lord provided somehow, presumably, but it's not of interest to the narrator. So, she went out from the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law were with her, and they went on the road to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return, each to the house of her mother." So that's interesting, right? You go to the father's house. It's patrilineal, so you go to the father's house, but this is to the house of her mother, which raises a very important question for those who say, well, the Bible is a patriarchal book and doesn't really deal with women. When it does, I mean, that's only partially true. When it does in spades. In fact, the only people that are really agents in the book of Ruth that promote action and deal with action are women. Boaz does what he does, but he's pretty much reacting, not acting. Who is the agent in the book? Who's the agent in the book? Ruth, okay, maybe. Naomi. In fact, I think the book ought to be called the Book of Naomi, because there's a good case that can be made that she sets in motion everything that happens. But who's the primary actor in the book who's not really named very much? God, I think, is the primary actor. Providence, usually hidden providence, is at the heart of this book. Okay? God is active, although he's like the stage manager behind the scenes. He's directing the actions that happen, and you mainly don't see his action made explicit, but through the activities of history and through the actions of other people. But I think a good case can be made that God brings things into being in order to provide for his people and for their future. Okay? So I think that's very important. God is maybe the most important actor. Secondly, God uses Naomi, I think, and also Ruth as the primary actors. So, return to the house of her mother. Each of you return to the house of her mother. May the Lord do with you, and the word here is not easily translatable, but you probably heard hesed, loving loyalty or covenant loyalty, or sometimes loving kindness, sometimes steadfast love. I think steadfast love is better than other translations. Some just say kindness or mercy or love, and all those are, I think, too wimpy to express the meaning of the term. May the Lord deal with you according to his steadfast covenant love is, I think, the root meaning of the little word. May God deal with you in a loyal, loving way, as you have done with the dead and with me. So these have been exemplary women, Orpah and Ruth. May the Lord give to you, and may you find rest, each in the house of her husband. So she's sending them back to remarry, giving them their freedom from any sort of tie with her. Okay, so they can remarry and have a life. In the ancient world, there really are no unattached women. Okay, there's no such thing. Well, there is such a thing as unattached women. They're the desperately poor that beg, or they are prostitutes. And if they're prostitutes, they're probably in the employ of somebody. Okay. Otherwise, all women belong to a household, and that's their ancient form of Social Security. If they marry, and especially if they have male children, those male children then inherit the family name and all the goods that belong to the family. The wealth, the name, and the reputation. Everything that belongs to the family are filtered through male issue, except for one interesting difference in the Pentateuch, where the daughters of Zelophehad get to inherit, because they get cranky and they take it up with Moses and say, this ain't fair, right? We need to be treated fairly, and so they're granted an exemption. Okay, otherwise, it's the exception that proves the rule. That's how things happen. That sets up the main problem. There is no male issue. Women can't inherit in ancient Israel. Naomi is desperately poor. She got these other two widow women that she's sending back to remarry so they can belong to another household that can take care of them and they can have male issue because they're left childless. Okay? That sets up the issue. Every word of this book is important. There's no kind of wasted verbiage here. Okay? So, may the Lord give to you, and may you find rest, each in the house of her husband. And she kissed them, but they lifted their voice and they wept. So they're not happy to be cut loose. They want to stay with Naomi, which is kind of exemplary. And they said to her, surely we will return with you to your people. And Naomi said, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb? This is very important because it's also part of the plot of the book. The book is about not just food and blessing in the form of food or symbolic in the form of food, but also it's about redemption. and how important that is. Okay, so hold on to those two thoughts because I think that helps us understand the whole book. Do I still have sons in my womb that they might be for you husbands? It's interesting. What is all that about? Return, my daughters, go, because I am too old to belong to a man. Why does she bring this up? It has to do with family redemption, okay? If I said, I have hope, even if I were to be with a man tonight, and also if I bore sons, would therefore you wait until they grew up? Would you therefore refrain from belonging to a man? No, my daughters, because because it is more bitter, exceedingly more bitter for me than it is for you. Now, I spent a little bit of time on this. That's a difficult passage. There are a couple of ways of looking at it. I think the NIV, if I remember right, says, it is more bitter for me on your behalf. One of your translations probably says that. Then it is more bitter for me than for you. Several translations translate it that way. Who has that? It's more bitter for me than you. So we have some that say that. Who has, it is bitter for me on your behalf? Who has that? Nobody has that? Well, yeah, you do have that. Okay. What translation is that? The ESV, it is bitter for me on your behalf. I think the better argument, it's the standard way of giving the comparative. It is more bitter for me than it is for you. That's how you say it in Hebrew. So I think the better argument is that. In other words, you got a bitter situation, but it is more bitter for me even than it is for you. In other words, you don't want to hang with me. This is a bad deal for you. Right? It is extremely better for me. You still have the possibility of redemption when the path seems closed to me. Why is it more bitter for her than it is for them? Because the arm of the Lord has gone out against me. Now, that seems rather harsh. For us, it just sounds really harsh, right? That God has done this. Well, in antiquity, God is truly the only agent. He's the one who does the acting. And we say, well, what God does is one thing, what God allows is something else. Guess what? How they would think in antiquity, BC, even AD, is that whether God wills it and allows it, or whether God actively pursues it, there's no difference. He sits in the big chair and he's responsible for all of it. And so the hand of God has done this. Whether he allowed it or whether he actively did it doesn't matter to them. That they would not understand that question, I don't think. Okay? God is truly the actor. God's responsible. He has done this. The arm of the Lord has gone out against me. Okay? And I think that helps us understand a lot of passages in the Bible by understanding that one simple truth, that God is the ultimate agent behind everything. And I think that's what Job accuses God of. God, you've done it to me. I know one thing. I know I didn't sin to deserve this, and I know you've done it. Okay? Whether God allowed it or actively did it was meaningless difference to him. All right. Backing up just a little, what is all this about? Even if do I still have sons in my womb that they might become husbands? What's all that about? There is an ancient practice that predates the Bible in the ancient world, which is still the case in some cultures. I spent some years teaching annually in Kenya, And they've assured me that the practice of family redemption still is the case among Kenyan tribes, even though they're non-Semitic, but it's especially the case in ancient traditional Semitic cultures. That is what is Semitic. We're used to thinking that's Jewish, but it's also Arab, right? Arabs are Semites. And there are others, Yemenites, many Ethiopians are Semitic peoples, and they speak Semitic languages. And so this practice still obtains, but it was especially the case back then, and that is redemption. Now, what do you redeem if you're an ancient person, what needs to be redeemed? What are the avenues of redemption? Why would you need to be redeemed? This is not a rhetorical question. Why do you think? What kind of, like, an error, a wrong that, to what? Okay, but you can't really redeem God. Let's go down a notch, a few levels. Okay, against a person. Now, they believed in individuals in the ancient world. They did. But the individual identity was mainly, first of all, the individual is part of a group. Secondarily, that individual is just an individual. We find that terribly difficult to follow in our culture because we're highly individualistic. We think, no, individual first, and then, oh yeah, well, they're like Americans, and they're Texans, and they live in Austin, and they're part of a family, kind of way down the line. That's not how they thought. The individuals were first primarily members of a group, so the sin or the wrong is against the family. Okay? And if you really do something really nasty, it's against also the clan, the tribe, and the nation of related Israelites. Okay? So crime against the family. So what might you do to redeem? It depends on what the wrong is, right? How can you wrong someone and that it requires redemption? What are ways of redeeming? What are ways of redeeming in the modern world? What kind of restitution? Okay, or what do the courts don't really deal so much with that, do they? What in court, what do you normally do for restitution? Money. Right. So that's one way, and that's the way we normally think redeem. Oh, you redeem something from a pawn shop, you pay money, right? You give them money, you get the thing back. That's only one way of redemption in the ancient world. Yeah, Darren. Okay, adoption. Why would you need to redeem by means of adoption? What problem is there with that? You've lost a kid, or you can't have a kid, and so you adopt. And so the point is to minimize the hit to the family, right, by redeeming the situation. And one way you could do that is through a child, right, through adoption. Yeah. Well, yeah, the child has fewer rights than the family does, right? So, yes. And so the problem in the book is you've got a couple of widow women that have basically very, very few rights. They're not belonging to a central family unit. The head of the family has died. All the husbands have died, and leaves two widow women alone. That is the problem of the book. They need to be redeemed. Now, one of the most important features of ancient Near Eastern redemption practices is family redemption. When you read the word redeem or redemption in the Old Testament, think of it first this way: to recover the wrong done to the family. Okay? Now, if someone is killed unjustly, murder, then the avenger of blood is how we normally translate the phrase in the Old Testament, but that's not what it literally says in Hebrew. It says the Redeemer of blood. Because blood has been unjustly spilled, and so how you rectify that is you go, and the appointed avenger or redeemer of blood goes and takes out the person who committed murder. Now, there are allowances against that unbridled practice in the Old Testament. Cities of refuge were chosen so that the person who committed manslaughter did not intend to do it, right? He runs to a city of refuge, and then it comes before the elders and the priests of that city, and they judge to see whether there was, forethought or not. If it was a simple accident, the guy had to live there until the death of the high priest, then he could go free. Okay? So there are allowances to the ancient practice. It's assumed that people are going to do that. Okay? Now here, you've got a different case than that, and that is the death of husbands, and no one has stepped up to redeem. Okay? And that's very important theme of the book, family redemption. In this case, there's another practice that's closely related. It's called levirate marriage. Levir means brother-in-law marriage. Okay? The brother-in-law who is designated to take the widow as his own wife and raise up kids for who? For the dead brother. It will not be his kid. Will not be his kid. Will be for the dead brother, and to raise up the name of the dead over his inheritance is the phrasing that's used. So she says, do I still have husbands in my womb for you? Are you going to wait till they grow up so they can be your husbands? Are you going to refrain from, by the time they grow up? Even if it were possible, she said, frankly, it's not. I'm old. I'm too old, she says. I'm too old for that, right? And so, it's like Sarah. It has ceased to be for Sarah according to the way of women, right? In other words, she's gone through menopause. No kids, right? So it's divine intervention in the case of Sarah. In this case, you guys can't wait 20 years or however long, before you can have a child of mine to redeem the name of the dead and lift it up over his inheritance so that the name of the dead does not vanish from the earth. So that's what all this is about, and it sets up the plot of the book, which I think is this is one of my favorite books in the entire Bible, because it's a whole lot deeper and more meaningful than a cursory reading at first you might think. So, family redemption is at issue here. So you guys need to go home. Where did I read? Yes, okay, verse 14. I don't know if you're... I think this tracks with the English. A lot of books of the Old Testament are one verse off. Verse 14 is this. Tell me if that's not. They lifted their voice and they wept again. Is that verse 14? Okay. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung on her or stuck closely to her. She was just like glue. I ain't going nowhere, right, is the point. And she said, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you, to return from following after you, because to wherever you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Now, a whole lot I could say. I'll trim it down. This is a famous wedding song. I don't remember how, entreat me not to leave you, blah, blah, blah. It's taken from this. Probably the most famous passage in the entire book of Ruth would be this, right? You hear it all the time. So, and it's a lovely passage, and it speaks volumes about the character of this young Moabite widow, okay? She doesn't need to do this. She is not in any way beholden to this Israelite widow. She doesn't have to stay. She's been cut loose, right? But she says, no, I'm sticking with you. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and thus may he increase, if only death will separate between me and you. Well, some of your translations, the ESV says only death, the NIV says in other words, if even death won't separate us, is the point. Well, the problem is only or even are not even in the text. That's an attempt to understand. Literally it says, because death will separate between me and between you. That's what the Hebrew literally says. So there's a little gap there that people have tried to fill it in with only or even. You get to decide what you think. If not even death will separate us, or only death will separate us, I think it's probably an issue without a real point to it. In other words, I'm sticking with you for good. She saw that she was determined, that is, Naomi saw that Ruth was determined. When do I stop? Oh, I'm done. Okay. All right. To go with her, and she ceased speaking to her. Can I? No, it's too far. Let me hold off. We'll stop there. She stopped speaking to her. So beginning in verse 19, they head towards Judah, and we'll pick that up again next time, if there is a next time. Okay. All right. Thank you.